What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. It is week 9. I am Graham Barfield. I'm one of the co-owners here at this fantastic website, FantasyPoints.com. Thanks so much for hanging out with us here. Week 9, start set. It is a brutal week. Right off the top, we got 4 teams on bye, 4 teams that we obviously use a ton in our fantasy lineups on bye, and in general, it's just kind of like a gross slate of matchups. We've got a couple good island games. Bills, Bengals, obviously a great island game. But in general, a lot of low totals, a lot of low implied team totals. So let's get to it. Obviously, a big part of the reason this slate is so gross, I can kind of bury the lead, is we've got a ton of quarterback injuries, and you're probably trying to find the best streamer possible. This week, I have 2. Really 3. The first one is Sam Howell. He's a little more obvious. He should be highly owned in a lot of your leagues. But if he's not, he's still out there on the waiver wire in like a 10-team league or something like that, and you really need a quarterback, he would be my guy this week. But if you don't have Sam Howell available, 2 of the lower-owned options that we're typically not playing too often in one quarterback leagues that I like a lot more this week, they get elevated in matchups, and in my rankings this week, are Derek Carr and CJ Stroud. Derek Carr is definitely more of a hold-your-nose play. Like, he's never really had a ton of upside, but last week was his best game of the season. Let's see if he can roll that over in this great matchup. Bears have given up 18 or more fantasy points to 6 of the 8 quarterbacks that they have faced this season. Their defensive line will be better. Montez Sweat will obviously help, generate a pass rush in the interior. But listen, I think Carr is a fine streamer this week. He's got a solid floor. He's Derek Carr. He's gonna have a couple throws where he misses Chris Olave, or Olave gets the ball dunked off his helmet. The Saints are going to be frustrating, but I do think Carr has a safe floor for one quarterback leagues. The other guy I like is CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud obviously been great this season as a rookie. Last week had one of his worst games of the year, but that was only because he only threw 24 pass attempts. And just this has kind of been a theme watching the Panthers this year. They just want to play slow, ugly football and slow the game down. A number of teams have had season-low pass attempts against the Panthers this year. This is a good spot for it to bounce back, the pass volume to bounce back. Houston's still a little too run-heavy, I think, for our liking. But in general, this is a great spot. And if they do let Stroud let it rip, man, I think he could have a really good game. Tampa Bay has allowed 250 or more yards to 5 of the 7 quarterbacks they faced. And the only 2 that didn't do it, oh God, one of them was Derek Carr. He had a shoulder injury in week 4 against Tampa. He did not get there. The other quarterback that didn't get there against Tampa for 250 or more yards was Justin Fields. And that was that week 2 game where Fields had a little bit of a meltdown and kind of, I think, restarted his season and kind of propelled him back up. And then unfortunately he got hurt. But CJ Stroud, I think, makes a lot of sense as a kind of back-end QB1 streamer this week if you need him. If we like CJ Stroud, we have to like a couple of his receivers, and the one that I like the most this week is Nico Collins. Listen, I know he had an awful game last week against the Panthers. It was a good matchup, completely airballed. Again, 24 pass attempts last week for the Texans, just completely killed this entire offense. But the underlying metrics on the low volume still look really good for Nico Collins, man. He was great. 35% first read target share according to Fantasy Points data last week. That's been right in line with Nico, man. He's been over 27% of the first reads in 5 of 7 games this year. Robert Woods isn't going to play again. And for all the reasons I outlined with Stroud, Tampa Bay is a little more of a pass funnel. And what I mean by that is they have a really strong run defense, and it forces opponents to throw the ball and air the ball out. That's part of the reason why they've given up so many passing yards this year. Opponents are averaging 43 passing plays per game against Tampa Bay. It's top 5 in the NFL. I don't think Houston gets to that level of volume this week, but if Stroud gets back up to a normal, like 33, 35, 36 attempts, I think Nico Collins is going to have a great game for fantasy. I think Tank Dell is usable as like a upside flex play in the spot too. He set a season high 89% route share last week, according to Fantasy Points data. Again, Robert Woods is out. Dell's a rookie. We always see this by midseason, especially with rookies like Dell, who wasn't really a true full-time player like Jordan Addison was. Dell's going to start to ascend here, and I think you can go back to him for all the reasons we like Stroud and Collins this week. One other receiver that I like quite a bit as a wide receiver 2-3 upside play, who's been definitely up and down just like Nico Collins this year, it's Gabe Davis. And interestingly, I haven't talked up Gabe Davis on this show, and I've kept him in like a flex play territory in my article over on Fantasy Points. This week I feel pretty good about him as a wide receiver too. And the main reason is they changed up his usage last week. Just watching the game, I was just like, man, Gabe's kind of getting these like shallower targets. They're getting him involved in a little more like timing and rhythm based throws as opposed to just like up the boundary shots or like the occasional screen. No, this was actually like pretty strong usage for Gabe. Interestingly, we typically want our receivers to have more targets down the field, right? Like Chris Olave, like please keep giving him these downfield targets. He's going to hit on one of them. With Gabe, we actually want some shallower looks so he can have a little more consistency for fantasy. That's what he's really missed in fantasy his entire career. I mean, we know the ceiling. We know he can drop the 100-yard touchdown games. We just need a little more consistency week to week. And if this sticks, again, it's a 1 week, it's a 1 week sample size. But if this sticks, Gabe is going to be a pretty strong fantasy asset for the rest of the season. His average depth of target last week, guys, was 6.3 yards. That was a season low, and it was a season low by far. Like Gabe Davis's ADOT, average depth of target, according to FantasyPoints data, again, does not typically dip below like 10 yards. And if they're going to get him involved again in these like kind of short and intermediate areas, it's going to really help him for fantasy. And specifically last week, Tampa Bay ran a ton of cover 1 and cover 3. They run a lot of 1 high safety looks, and the Bengals do too. Bengals are the 5th highest rate of 1 high safety looks. And typically in this offense with the Bills, man, like it's we've seen it. It runs through Stephon Diggs. So if they are actually going to commit to giving Gabe the ball, against 1 high safety looks, you mix in Dalton Kincaid, who, by the way, is like a must start unless you have, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, or TJ Hawkinson. Kincaid's a must start, but I really, really do like Gabe this week. And for the rest of the season, he might be a buy low. If your opponents, league mates are still thinking he's the spike week player, I think there's a little bit of signal here. Bills are, they're trying to win a Super Bowl, man. They're trying to get the best out of this roster. And Gabe performed well in this kind of revised role. This week, obviously, Bengals-Bills has one of the highest shootout potentials, maybe the only high shootout potential besides Chiefs-Dolphins in Germany. I like Gabe Davis quite a bit to give you some upside as a wide receiver too. One final receiver play that I like quite a bit this week is like a wide receiver 3 flex play. A player who's been trending up for pretty much the entire season, but specifically really these last 4 weeks, is Rashod Rice. He is obviously the Chiefs receiver who has the most juice here, and the Chiefs see it, obviously. They're giving him a much higher role, a much larger role. He's kind of splitting between out wide and in the slot. I think he can win in both spots, but we really want him to get the majority of the slot routes and get those targets from Patrick Mahomes in the interior, and that's what he's continued to do. Last 4 games, he has 4 receptions in 4 straight. He's converted his 20 targets into 17 receptions and 220 yards. Again, gaining Patrick Mahomes' trust. He's up near about a 60% route share last week. That was a season high for him. Sky Moore, Justin Watson, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, all these guys just clearly aren't doing it. There's one guy. It's Rashod Rice. Again, we're searching for upside this week, guys. We're searching for good games. We're searching for good fantasy games and games that can be back and forth. And obviously, Dolphins-Chiefs is one of those games. So if you've got Rashod Rice and you really need some upside in like a flex spot or your wide receiver 3 in PPR leagues, I would go right back to Rice. Running back is absolutely gross this week, guys. It's really gross. Just like going through rankings. Man, once you get past 15, maybe even 13 this week, it's really, really dicey. There's some like obvious RB2 plays like Rashod White. You're going right back to him just because the receiving role has been so great. I know he gets stonewalled almost every carry at this point. Houston's got a good run defense, but I think you got to go right back to him. The Patriots backfield is just the same 60-40, 55-35 split. It's always been. You're not really too excited about those guys. Brian Robinson, I will say last week we were a little concerned that he would be in like a 3-way committee because Chris Rodriguez, it seemed like he was starting to trend up. He had 11 carries. B-Rob had 18 in their 2 previous games. And last week, Rodriguez just like mysteriously didn't play a snap. Fantasy points guy, Chris Rodriguez, he'll probably still continue to trend up in this backfield. But at least for this week, maybe you can feel good about B-Rob in that game. But it's gross, man. The one backfield I do want to talk about and I think is a little interesting this week is this Colts backfield, right? Like, Jonathan Taylor ripped off that like 45-yarder, 42-yard or something, and early in that game against the Saints, and I was like, oh, baby, here we go. JT's about to break out. He had a great first half. He had, fantastic first half, over 90 yards rushing, looked fantastic. He looks like JT. And then the second half, they didn't go back to him. It was bizarre. Obviously, Colts got down to the Saints. It was a 2-score game in the fourth quarter. You're really not trying to like run it in that kind of period, but like at least give him a check down, give him a screen target, something. It was a little bizarre. He's not dealing with an injury. This is such a good spot. It's a good spot for him and for Zach Moss. Like looking at industry consensus projections, I think JT is like a little bit too high. I love Jonathan Taylor. Absolutely have been, loved his talent coming out of college. We're obviously buying in this offense long term, especially with Anthony Richardson. But Zach Moss is not leaving, guys. Like, he is absolutely flex viable this week, and it's mainly because, like, one, he's good. Two, his role's not going away. And three, this is an awesome spot. Carolina is giving up 155 scrimmage yards per game to opposing running backs. That's second most in the NFL to Denver. And the Broncos have been much better defensively. I mean, if you've been watching the games, tracking the numbers, you've seen it. I mean, they're not anything special, the Broncos, but they're definitely a little bit better. Carolina might have the worst overall run defense in the NFL. Obviously, JT's like a must play. Again, I think he's a little overprojected. He could have a massive game. I'm not saying he won't. It's really just more to say, like, Zach Moss is going to continue to play here. If you need him as a flex play, you need him as an RB2, I think Moss makes some sense. He could absolutely get you 65 yards and maybe a touchdown once again this week. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for listening as always. If you could, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like below. I know you guys hear this all the time, but it really, really does help us, and it would mean a lot to me. Thanks for hanging out. Week 9, go get them. We'll see you next week.